A.E., the poet and his poetry. George William Russell was known to all as A.E. And today, the 13th day of December 2015, we begin our study of this great poet, painter, critic, editor, and Irish nationalist. A.E. was a mystic poet and active in the Theosophical movement. He was also an exceptionally kind and generous soul. His generosity and hospitality were legendary. Frank O'Connor fondly recalled his warmth and kindness, which enfolded you like an old fur coat. Russell was noted for his delicate, melodious style, his view of humanity's spiritual nature, and his mysticism. I remember reading many years ago how A.E. would walk with his wife down a small path in the woods, and he would tell her how each fairy was working on a different plant, or a flower, or a fern. Normally, we can find all we want on the internet about biographical information on poets. So our concentration in this series will be more on the poetry. But in the case of A.E., I would like to read today what he has written on himself, and I've taken it from a number of books. Sri Aurobindo has a lot to say about A.E. and his poetry. So I will read everything I have found from Sri Aurobindo after we hear what A.E. has said about himself. This section is from his book, Song and Its Fountains. He writes, "It is implied in this that we came to this world by our own will and for some purpose, and this thought has been with me since I was a boy, when I broke out in a fierce revolt at the idea that I was born into this world not by my own will, and would be punished if I neglected to do what I had never undertaken to do. I remember the deep peace which came to me when I had the intuition that Christ, Prometheus, are in every heart, and that we all took upon ourselves the burden of the world, like the Christ, and were foreseers, as Prometheus was, of the agony and the labor he undertook, until the chaos is subdued and wrought in some likeness to the image in the divine imagination. It will be seen that I look on the poet as prophet. I think, indeed, that almost the only oracles which have been delivered to humanity for centuries have come through the poets, though too often they have not kept faith with the invisible and have been guilty of the sin of simony. That's also pronounced simony, and it's an interesting word here, in reference to Simon Magus and his offer of money to Christ's disciples. Therefore, the practice of trafficking in sacred things. A.E. continues, but at times they still receive the oracles, as did the Sibyls of old, because in the practice of their art they preserve the ancient tradition of inspiration, and they wait for it with an airy, uplifted mind. They know, as Corot knew about painting, that you must go a little beyond yourself, and whatever revelation of beauty, of the spirit, has been in Europe for many centuries, has come not from the churches, who hold they already have the truth, but from the poets, who are still seekers, and who at times have that lordly utterance, as if the God were speaking through his prophets. Now we come to some passages from three of A.E.'s books, Homeward, Songs by the Way, and The Earth Breath, and we might even add from the Divine Vision. He writes, "This book holds what poetry of mine I would wish my friends to read. I have omitted what in colder hours seemed to me to have failed to preserve some heat of the imagination, but in that colder mood I have made but slight revision of those retained. However imperfect they seemed, I did not feel that I could in after hours melt and remold and make perfect the form if I was unable to do so in the intensity of conception. When I was in those heavens, we breathe for a moment and then find they are not for our clay. When I first discovered for myself how near the King in his beauty, I thought I would be the singer of the happiest songs. Forgive me, spirit of my spirit, for this, that I have found it easier to read the mystery told in tears, and understood thee better in sorrow than in joy. That though I would not, I have made the way seem thorny, and have wandered in too many byways, imagining myself into moods which held thee not. I should have parted the true from the false, but I have not yet passed away from myself, who am in the words of this book. Time is a swift winnower, and that he will do quickly for me." Now another passage from Song and its Fountains. For most of his boyhood and much of his life, the dream state, especially the waking dream, accompanied him. For most of his boyhood and much of his life, the dream state, especially the waking dream, companioned him. His visions of tens of ages past, and not always of the light, but of the darkness too, are recounted with vivid imagery in his book. Here are 4 lines quoted in Song and its Fountains that speak of the deep significance of his inner life and vision. I know when I come to my own immortal, I will find there, in a myriad instant, all the wandering soul found fair, empires that never crumbled, and thrones all glorious yet, and hearts ere they were broken, and eyes ere they were wet. I have selected some additional passages that speak more of A.E.'s inner life of dream and vision, and his waking life of dream, than of the long and often arduous path of soul discovery through pain and darkness that accompanied him as it does many seekers. A.E. writes, "In that respect, too, I regained memory of all the great of the... In that respect, too, I regained memory of the greatest of all wonders in my boyhood, when I lay on the hill of Kilmashog, and earth revealed itself to me as a living being, and rock and clay were made transparent, so that I saw lovelier and lordlier beings than I had known before, and was made partner in memory of mighty things, happenings in age long sunken behind, happenings in ages long sunken behind time. Though the walls about the psyche have thickened with age, and there are many heavinesses piled about it, I still know that the golden age is all about us, and that we can, if we will, dispel that opacity and have vision once more of the ancient beauty." While yet a boy, I began to run in and out of the house of dream, and as I went inwards, I grew older. An age of the spirit would fall upon me, and I would come out of reverie and be the careless boy once more. Yet something of the ancientness of the psyche within clung to the boy and began to part me from the thoughts of those about me. I at last realized with a kind of anguish that I was becoming a solitary, that a gulf had widened between myself and normal human life, between myself and home and love, the things in which most find a rich content. It was from the early verses I wrote that I had the clearest conviction of something in the deeps of being wiser than myself, with an age in thought and emotion which was not at all in the waking consciousness. I have told how when I was a boy, I began to run in and out of the house of dream, and as I went inward, an age of the spirit fell upon me, and then I would come out and be the careless boy once more, with all youth in his emotions and acts. I must make plainer what I mean by this age of thought imposed upon the outward nature. Sometimes, as I have said, the dream consciousness would flood the waking. At other times, I would be drawn inward, and in the midworld of the psyche, there would arise not merely visions of things I held to be memories, but imaginations, tales and myths that would arise which were purely symbolic. There are two wisdoms in us: the wisdom we are born with and the wisdom we acquire. The outer mind grows but slowly to maturity, and even at its culmination, it is never so wise as that other, enriched by the garnered wisdom of countless lives. He writes of his experience that produced his poem Babylon, which we will read in another episode. In that fierce illumination which gave birth to the poem, I was surrounded by a wavering of phantom pictures, a dusky beauty, all in rose and gold, flowered to me. There were high buildings, strange cars or chariots, a great room with stone walls, and an iron door, as if the whole of some gorgeous past wished to renew itself at that instant. Years after, I read about some half-buried city in Bashan, that the iron doors were still in the stone walls. Here were voices out of the deep of being, an eros that seemed to have run its race, and an eros eager as if it ran to meet its first love. I have found this duality in everything in my life, and I can only surmise some wisdom above the outworn heart and the eager heart, which understands that we cannot be wholly of this world or wholly of the heaven world, and we cannot enter that deity out of which came good and evil, light and darkness, spirit and matter, until our being is neither one or the other, but a fusion of opposites, a unity akin to that fullness where spirit, desire, and substance are raised above themselves and exist in that mystic unity of all things which we call deity. In chapter 8 he writes, I am far from that great glory which inhabits the universe, and can but peer through some momentary dusky transparency in my nature to a greater light than the light of day. I know the royal road is by practice of the great virtues, but I cannot speak that language or urge those obligations, I who have been angry and sensual. I can only speak where I have been faithful. I have never ceased from the inward search, and might by that faithfulness have gone far, if I had not a rabble of desires tugging me by the skirts to travel alluring roads in the world of illusion. I could peer only a little way, apprehending behind form the Creator, behind thought the Thinker, behind illusion the Seer, behind conscience the Love, and in fallen life some still unfallen majesty, and even in the basest desires could find sign of their spiritual ancestry. 4 lines. There was never sin of thine, but within its heart did dwell a beauty that could whisper thee of the high heaven from which it fell. I tell what I have surmised or discovered, by reason perhaps of that uncorrupted spiritual atom in my nature. I know there must be error, even in our highest approaches to the true, if the whole nature has not been purified and made transparent. by the magic of that music, which so rose within me, the universe seemed to reel away from me and to be remote and unsubstantial as the most distant nebulae. And for some minutes, I was able to recreate within myself the musical movement of the power and could stay the soul upon the high uplands. But it quickly vanished, as a dream might go after our waking, and try as I might, I could not recall it again. But for a moment, I understood what power might be in sound or incantation. It made me understand a little of those mystics who speak of traveling up a Jacob's ladder of sound to the Logos, the fountain of all melody. I found later, if meditation on the Spirit is prolonged and profound enough, we enter on a state where our being is musical, not a music heard without, but felt within, as if the soul itself had become music, or had drawn night to the ray of the Logos, the master singer, and was for that instant part of its multitudinous song. While the poem By the Margin of the Great Deep was being conceived, while the margin of the great deep was being conceived, I felt that music in my being before the words were swept together, a state akin to that I experienced in waking in dream, when I followed in their descending order the phases from deep own being through images or symbols to their last echo in words.